Hey guys, I'm Jen, and today I'm going to be giving you the long-awaited tutorial on how to perler. We'll be going over the supplies you need to get started, and I'll show you some tips and tricks that I've learned along the way. Perlering is a pretty simple craft, but parts of it do truly take practice and experience. Melting the beads together can be a little tricky, but it's not something that you can't master once you get used to your tools and your strength. Now, to get started, you're going to want a handful of supplies. First and foremost, you'll want to find a pattern. Pixel art makes great perlers. You can use patterns and pictures of other perlers you found online, or you can create your own pattern from just about any picture. Pattern creation is something we'll get into in more detail another time though. For now, just find something you want to create. In the beginning, the simpler the better. The pattern I've chosen today is one of my subscriber badges for my Twitch channel. It's just a red cat in the shape of a heart, and you can see it over here on the side of my screen. I'll keep it up as we're going along so you can reference back and compare the pixelated version to it we're going to be making. Now once you have your pattern chosen, you'll need to get your perler colors together. Let me take a small step back though. You're going to hear me refer to fusion beads as perlers throughout this video. That's just one brand name though. You know, it's kind of like band-aids and bandages. They're bandages, but most people call them band-aids because that's brand that makes them. We're working with fusion beads, but I personally only use Perler, so that's what I call them. There are other brands out there. Hama, ArtCal, many store brand versions, a bunch of other beads. Different countries make different beads, but they're all fusion beads. You can use whatever you want and whatever you have access to. I just prefer Perler. They're all slightly different in formula though, and they don't really mix well together. So if you can, try to stick to one brand per project. After you've chosen your color palette and have all of your beads ready to go, you'll need boards to work on. These pegboards can be found in the same aisle of your craft stores as the fusion beads. They typically come in packs of 4 for this size, but you can find other shapes and sizes as well. This one's just standard 29 by 29, and it has the ability to interlock with other boards. So if your intended project doesn't quite fit within this size constraint, you can easily add more boards together to give you more space. I also have one board that I keep separate from the rest of them, and I have it marked, this masking tape, just so that I know it's different. We're going to use this one later on in the project, so make sure that you have one handy too. You're also going to want to consider getting a set of Perler tweezers. These are literally long-nosed tweezers made by Perler. They're intended for use with their mini beads, but they work wonders with the regular size beads as well. Go ahead and grab some masking tape, something like a bone folder that's fairly sturdy, and a piece of parchment or Perler's ironing paper. When you're selecting your masking tape, try to avoid the blue painter's tape. It's thicker, not quite as sticky, and a lot harder to work with than basic masking tape. Some people swear by it, but I find it's just too much work and not worth the effort. If you can't find Perler's ironing paper, it does come in packs on its own. If you can't find it in the store sold on its own, that's okay. Each pack of boards that you buy comes with at least one piece, good enough to cover all 4 interlock together, so it'll be good to go for a little while. It is reusable, but it does degrade after time and repeated exposure to heat. And speaking of heat, you'll want to make sure you have an iron handy, as well as a surface safe to iron on. The desk I'm working on is actually heat resistant, so I can just do everything right here on my desk. Ironing pads and ironing boards aren't a bad option, but you really don't want something that's soft under your work while you're trying to melt it. It's not going to turn out bad, but it won't get a good even melt, which is ultimately what you're looking for. Set your iron to the cotton setting to start with. Once all your supplies are together and you've got your iron preheating in a safe place, you can go ahead and get started on your project. It's as simple as matching the colors in your pattern to the colors of your beads and placing each bead onto one of the pegs in the board until your pattern is complete. I use the tweezers for this because then not only can I place 2 beads at once, I don't knock over the ones I've already placed with my fat fingers. Okay, now that all our perlers are placed, we can tweak things and make sure our creation is exactly the way we want and all the colors are where they should be. I kind of already did that as we were going through, so for this particular piece, I think we're good. I'm not going to make any changes. Okay, now this step is where you can literally make or break your creation, so please go into it knowing that it's very likely something can go wrong. One slip of the tape and you can lose a whole section of your work. What we want to do next is take strips of masking tape and lay them over the beads until the creation is fully covered. You want to try to overlap as little as possible, but you want to make sure the pieces of tape are actually connected to each other. You really don't want to do this while you're on your paper. I forgot to move it. Now, despite this part being pretty fussy, it's actually very, very important, at least for the melting technique that we do. It allows you to take the project off of the board so you don't melt your board when you're ironing the piece. Some people don't mind ironing straight on the board, and Perler's actual instructions tell you to do that, but I fully melt the back sides of all of my pieces, so trying to do that while the piece is still on the board means I'm probably going to melt some of the board to my work. Okay. Once we get everything taped up, you're going to want to take your bone folder or your whatever thing that you're using that's sturdy, and you're going to just smooth out all of the tape and make sure that it's fully adhered to each of the beads. You can't really see it on camera very well, but in person you'll be able to see that you've gotten everything. It's pretty obvious when the bead is stuck to the tape. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to be enough so that you can remove the piece from the board by holding the tape and not lose your pieces. You don't want to lose your beads. Okay, now we're all taped, everything looks good, it's time to poke holes. This is where that separate board comes in that I was talking about before, the one that I have with masking tape on it. I keep this separate so that I can go ahead and poke holes in my pieces, and it doesn't matter if the board cracks or warps. This board is not going to be used for actual Perler pieces, it's only ever going to be used to poke holes in my tape. Now, some people do use tweezers to poke holes in their tape, and that's perfectly fine, but when you do that, it's two at a time. It's individual, it takes forever. For me, it's just not efficient. So what I do is I line up my second board on top of my first one with the pegs facing down. Get it all lined up. Sometimes you have to stand up for this. And then you're just going to press right in. Sorry for the jostly camera. But it shakes everything because you're poking holes in your tape. You want to hear that click, because that's how you know you got it. I usually start from the outsides and work my way inside. It just makes it a little bit easier. Okay. If you use the tape method to prepare your Perlers for ironing, you need to poke the holes. Without the holes, the heat from the iron can't escape and you're going to end up with blowouts. Let me see if I can find a piece. Here we go. I'm going to talk about blowouts. See all these holes? You don't want that. This is, I forgot to poke holes in my piece, in my tape before I tried to iron it. The heat couldn't escape, so the beads didn't melt the way they were supposed to. And this poor little panda, I had to remake him. When you do poke holes in your tape, everything can melt all nice and evenly, and you've got yourself a pretty good perler. You're going to want to carefully remove the board, the second board, from the tape, and then you have to carefully remove. This is why it's so important that the tape is overlapped, so you can do it all in one piece. You have to remove the perler with the tape from the first board. Do it very, very, very carefully. You don't want to lose any of your perlers. And there you go. Now, if you have a pair of scissors that you want to use to trim around some of those edges, you don't have to have all of these edges. I just did it because I did. I kind of work better that way. But if you don't want all of this in your way, it's not going to make a big difference. Make sure everything is somewhat smooth. You're going to make sure that you've set your piece on your heat-safe surface. You're going to place your parchment or ironing paper over the piece and get ready to iron. Now, please, 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 please do not use wax paper. The wax will melt once you start ironing, and you'll make a huge mess and ruin your art. It's kind of the same way that you don't want to use wax paper when you're baking in the oven, because the wax just melts off and it gets all over your food, and that's not a good thing. This is the part that takes the most practice and experience, and yet it seems like it really should be the easiest part. If you choose to do the full melt technique like I do and melt one side of the bead as fully as possible and not touch the other side with heat at all, it's going to take some time to get used to how to achieve that. The right combination of heat, pressure, and time is something you're going to have to figure out on your own. Unfortunately, that's just the case. There's no simple formula I can give you or a set amount of time that you have to iron your piece to be able to do this. It depends on the iron you use, how much pressure you put on the piece while you're ironing, and even the colors you've chosen to use in your project. Darker colors take a little bit longer to melt than lighter colors, so you just have to play around with what you've got until you have it down. It won't be perfect every time, no matter how experienced you are. That's just the nature of the art. You can, though, get things pretty darn close to perfect and have it still look great. The melting process is why you'll hear a lot of people tell you not to mix fusion beads together, different brands. Each company uses a different formula to make their bead, and they don't always work well together. Yeah, they'll all melt to each other, but the melting times could vary drastically, and you may overmelt your piece while you're trying to get another part to melt even at all. Some people don't have any problems melting different brands together, but I've done my own research and experimenting, and I'm just not a fan of it. While you're ironing, you can kind of see through the paper how things are going, so you know where you need to focus on a little bit more. You want to try to keep the heat consistent, though. Mine look good, so I'm going to go ahead and turn my iron off. Now, you're going to want to quickly take the tape off of your piece while it's still warm. Be careful, we did just use a ton of heat. You're not going to burn yourself, but it may not feel so great to touch. We need to get the tape off while it's still warm so you don't end up with residue all over your piece. So use your judgment if you want to wait a little bit or not. I don't have a huge issue with heat, so I'm just going to take mine off, as I've done. Place your work under something heavy while it cools so it doesn't start to curl up on the sides. And once it's cooled, you're done. There you go. I hope I've answered some of your questions and have given you a decent starting point for making your own perler creations. Of course, feel free to leave your questions and comments down below. I'd love to see what you create. Feel free to tag me on any social media if you share your piece online. Thanks so much for your time and for watching this video. I hope it helped, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye!